Thank you for starting your week with us. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Lee Ji-yoon in Seoul. Coming up on today's edition of Business Daily. If the Korea-US FTA ends up going back to the drawing board, how would Korea be affected? Foreign investments in the Korean stock market continue to rise this year on the back of strong corporate earnings in the first quarter. Can it keep this momentum in the second half of this year? These stories and more coming right up. We start things off with an issue on trade, more specifically lingering fears that the Korea-US Free Trade Agreement could be renegotiated. Korea's steel and auto exports are likely to be targeted in the scenario that the trade deal goes back to the drawing board. Our Oh Soo-young has the details.
During President Moon Jae-in's state visit to Washington last week, President Trump pushed for a renegotiation of the 5-year-old free trade agreement between the two nations.
We will do more to remove barriers to reciprocal trade and market access.
Trump emphasized auto and steel trade as tough issues. He said Korea must provide American car makers with a fair shake to sell their cars in the Korean market, having argued in the past that they're hindered by non-tariff barriers. Last year, Korea's outbound shipments of automobiles to the US amounted to $15.4 billion, which is 9 times the amount that US automakers export to Korea. However, the trade difference has narrowed considerably since the FTA went into effect. Korea's car exports to the US dropped almost 10%, while US cars bound for Korea grew by 22% over the 5-year period. Also, US automakers enjoy looser regulations in Korea compared to the EU and Japanese markets. Experts say the reason why American cars have sold less in the Korean market is more likely due to consumer preferences that lean toward Japanese and European brands. Another key issue is steel. The Trump administration has been taking various trade measures against the flooding of cheap Chinese steel components in the US market, which is indirectly supplied through other countries. While Korea is the second largest supplier of US steel imports, only 2% of the amount contains steel made in China, which makes it a stretch to pin the blame on Korea.
Trade restrictions on Korean steel will only disadvantage American consumers in the end, as prices will be driven up if imports are capped.
If the FTA does go back to the drawing board, experts say Seoul must emphasize the sizable benefits the deal has brought to the US, which it could now lose out on. These include tens of thousands of American jobs generated by Korean companies, as well as investment in production facilities. Oh Soo-young, Business Daily.
After suffering heavy losses last year due to an industry-wide slump, Korean shipbuilders are bouncing back. Having won 34% of global orders by the end of June, Korean shipyards reclaimed their #1 spot in the world market after finishing runner-up behind China for 5 years. According to industry tracker Clarkson Research on Monday, Korean firms won orders worth 2.5 million compensated gross tons by the end of June. Now that's double the amount of orders compared to the same period last year. Hyundai Heavy Industries won contracts for 72 vessels, while Samsung Heavy Industries snagged orders for 13 ships and 2 offshore plants. Daewoo Shipbuilding also received orders for 7 new vessels after receiving a $2.6 billion bailout package in April to keep the company afloat. The KOSPI index rose for the 7th consecutive month in June, hitting a series of record highs in the process. Local shares were boosted by a huge inflow of foreign capital as investors were encouraged by signs of recovery in Korea's economic health. Analysts are expecting foreign investment to continue flooding the local equity market in the latter half of this year. Our Lee Ji-young explains why.
Foreign investment in the Korean stock market has reached a level not seen since 2009. According to the Korea Exchange, net purchases by foreigners this year in the benchmark KOSPI index amounted to more than $8 billion. Together with a smaller KOSDAQ, total purchases came to $8.9 billion. The recent surge in demand for Korean stocks this year is largely attributed to strong corporate earnings in the first quarter. Semiconductor giant Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix saw skyrocketing profits thanks to the increase in global demand for memory chips that also pushed up unit prices. The continued recovery in exports, the new Moon administration, and a positive outlook on the domestic economy have boosted investor sentiment. Experts say the foreign appetite for local stocks will grow for the foreseeable future.
A positive outlook on the new government and its policies to revitalize the domestic economy, the supplementary budget, for instance, is expected to boost investor sentiment until the end of the year.
Corporate earnings for the second quarter, which are scheduled for release throughout the week, have already spurred a buying spree as foreign investors anticipate hefty profits. This drove up the KOSPI, which hit historic highs in recent weeks, breaking the 2,400 threshold for the first time during trading hours. While the index may fluctuate in the short run due to global factors like a decline in oil and material prices and other interest rate hikes in the U.S., most experts believe the KOSPI will continue on the up, some projections even putting it over the 3,000 mark within this year. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
The Korean equity market was a little slow out of the gates in the first session of the week. Tech shares that have led recent gains fell today and dragged down both indexes. We're now joined by our markets contributor Choi Jin-seok to tell us more about the overall stock market performance as well as upcoming market events. Hello, Jin-seok.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so how did the Korean stock market do on the first day of the week?
Both the KOSPI and the KOSDAQ market began the week with a somewhat sluggish picture. The KOSPI edged up 0.11% to close at 2394.48 after trading water all today, while the KOSDAQ fell 1.2% to close at 660. The KOSPI market opened the session with an uptick, stayed mostly in positive territory throughout the morning. However, the market gave up early gains in late trading hours as investors were not aggressive enough to move. The KOSPI index was seemingly aimless throughout the session, hovering around the 2390 mark. Today's movements on the KOSPI market closely mirrored intraday movements of major tech shares. In particular, Samsung Electronics, the largest stock by market cap, gave up early gains, falling by a small margin, and SK Hynix, the second largest stock, plummeted as well, dragging down the entire KOSPI index during this session. By sector, chemicals, steel, machinery, and communications performed relatively strongly. However, these gains were not enough to offset losses in the technology sector, which accounts for a larger portion of the KOSDAQ market, with both foreigners and institutional investors unloading shares.
Then what are some of the market events lined up for this week? I mean, market participants are paying a lot of attention on the Q2 earnings season, which will be kicking off very shortly.
That's right. All eyes are on Samsung Electronics, which reports its Q2 earnings guidance on Friday. The results are considered a beginning of the earnings season as well. Expectations have been surging. Domestic securities firms have been raising their consensus on the company's Q2 operating income from 11.3 trillion Korean won in Q1 to 13.1 trillion Korean won as of the end of last month. Samsung is also expected to record the largest operating income among non-financial firms globally over Apple. However, concerns over relatively weak corporate earnings of non-tech firms are still remaining among investors. The technology sector has been in the spotlight in overseas markets too. Tech stocks in the U.S. have surged by 15% in 2017. However, the sector plummeted by more than 2% in June, raising concerns over overvaluation. Therefore, investors will need to take a look at how tech shares in the U.S. are moving because the sector has been affecting the overall sentiment.
Now, you've mentioned a huge gap between tech and non-tech firms when it comes to Q2 earnings. So what are the expectations on the Q2 earnings season as a whole?
Right. The consensus for Q2 net income among KOSPI companies is 31.7 trillion Korean won, a 16% increase year over year. However, excluding Samsung Electronics, the companies are expected to record only a 3% rise in their net profits. In Q1, earnings growth for the companies listed on the KOSPI was 30% excluding Samsung. Therefore, experts advise investors to lower the bars for the Q2 earnings season. This is why experts say investors need to be more selective going forward too. Among subsectors, semiconductors, software, technology, and home appliances are expected to continue their earnings growth. Financials, shipbuilding, and transportation are the sectors that are expected to report decent earnings too.
And there are also a few important economic indicators lined up for this week.
Exactly. Most importantly, the U.S. Labor Department will release a monthly employment report on Friday local time. Economists project the U.S. labor market created more than 170,000 jobs last month, an increase from 138,000 jobs in May. More attention is given to wage growth because the Federal Reserve or the Fed has been closely watching the data when it comes to future policy decisions. Other than employment figures, America's ISM Manufacturing Index and auto sales will be reported on Monday, durable goods orders on Wednesday, and ADP job gains on Thursday, which will give hints on the Labor Department report on Friday. These are some of the indicators investors are expected to take a close look at throughout this week.
And global investors will also get a chance to look at what kind of conversations went on during the latest FOMC meeting.
Right. The minutes of the June FOMC meeting will be released on Wednesday. And at the June meeting, the Fed raised interest rates, signaling another rate hike within this year. However, it seems opinions among Fed officials are still divided. For example, St. Louis Fed President James Bullard has been strongly arguing that the Fed should wait until inflation picks up further. Therefore, the minutes this week will give hints on the details of what Fed officials have in mind. A number of Fed officials are going to deliver speeches this week too, and the list includes Fed Vice Chair Stanley Fischer on Thursday, St. Louis Fed President James Bullard on Monday, and Fed Governor Jerome Powell and San Francisco Fed President John Williams on Thursday.
All right, thank you so much for that outlook today.
Thank you.
Japan's business confidence improved in the April to June period, rising for the third consecutive quarter. The Bank of Japan released its quarterly business survey, or Tankan, of 11,000 companies earlier today, and both large manufacturing and non-manufacturing firms showed improved sentiments. Large manufacturing rose 5 points to a reading of 17, while non-manufacturing rose 3 points to a figure of 23. Tight job market conditions has policymakers hoping for wage increases that would signal further economic recovery. Yuichiro Nagai, an economist at Barclays Securities, said the survey backs up the Bank of Japan's optimistic view of the economy. Now, despite the rosy outlook, economists are not as enthusiastic when looking ahead to the third quarter, with large manufacturing expected to fall 2 points and non-manufacturers to shed 5 points. China's manufacturing bounced back in June following a surprise contraction in May, with new orders and production both showing signs of recovery. However, the private survey showed that despite the upturn in factory activity, caution remains over tightening financial conditions and a government crackdown on debt risks. The Caixin Market Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index rose to 50.4 in June, above the 50-point threshold that separates growth from contraction. It was well above the 49.5 level forecasted by analysts in a Reuters survey and marks an improvement from May's 49.6, which was the first contraction in 11 months. While improved orders helped push the figure back above 50, the firm survey noted that both domestic and global demand were still fairly subdued. Saturday marked 20 years since Hong Kong was handed over from British to Chinese rule. And as new leader Carrie Lam was sworn in over the weekend, the anniversary came as Hong Kong deals with the biggest wealth gap recorded in close to 5 decades. Our Eunice Kim has the story.
Against the glimmer of Hong Kong's shiny skyscrapers and flashy designer storefronts is a shadow of an extending wealth gap. Hong Kong's latest report on household income distribution, released by its Census and Statistics Department last month, showed its income inequality was second only to New York City globally, logging its worst figure since records were kept 46 years ago. Its Gini coefficient in 2016 came to 0.539 last year, climbing 0.021 points from what it was 2 decades earlier, 1 year before the Hong Kong handover. A higher Gini coefficient corresponds to a more uneven distribution of income in a population. What it also showed was a growing wealth gap, where the richest 10% were bringing in a monthly income nearly 44 times more than of their counterparts in the poorest 10%, amounting to some $14,400 versus less than $330. The report attributed the disparity to a jump in the number of smaller households and in the aging population. The non-governmental Hong Kong Council of Social Service echoes that view, saying low-income elderly were the most vulnerable demographic in a system that lacks a universal pension scheme, as Oxfam adds 1 in 3 persons living in poverty are elderly.
And it is so terrible that we find that many Hong Kong poor people or elderly people living in very small cubicles or in subdivided flats in Hong Kong. I think one of the most urgent things for the new government to do is to increase the public rental housing protection in Hong Kong so that the poor people can have decent living in Hong Kong.
According to real estate agency Jones Lang LaSalle, home prices have jumped by 76% since the market peaked 2 decades earlier, with a typical apartment tagged at nearly $900,000.
But property prices have always been a problem and still remain a problem that we need to tackle. That's why for the current term, we've been very, very proactive and very firm in our approach is to cool down the market and at the same time tackle the problem at source, create more land.
And while the new Carrie Lam government has promised to figure out how to free up more land, it faces intense pressure to identify a solution to bring Hong Kong's soaring housing prices back down from what incumbent Financial Secretary Paul Chan has characterized a, quote, dangerous situation. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
Nearly 4 out of 10 working women here in Korea have been classified as low-income earners by the OECD, once again topping its list among the 16 member states that provided comparable data. According to OECD data released on Monday, 37.6% of Korea's female workforce in 2015 were low-wage workers, which means they took home less than 2/3 of median earnings. Although it was a 0.2 percentage point decrease from the year before, it still remained 8 percentage points higher than the United States, which came in second on the list. Korea has had the dubious honor of holding on to the #1 spot for years, though it has been clawing gains since the year 2000, when the figure was seen at 45.77%. Korean lawmakers are looking for ways to regulate the use of Bitcoin and other digital currencies within the country. Democratic Party lawmaker Park Yong-jin will submit a proposal this month aimed at revising the current digital transaction law. The changes will seek to ban the trading, issuing, depositing, and conducting of business transactions with digital currencies without a permit from financial authorities. According to the revision bill, businesses will be required to have capital worth more than $430,000 and sufficient data processing facilities in order to be eligible for a permit. The proposal also includes measures to levy taxes on earnings generated from the use of digital currencies. Around 320,000 eggs from Thailand arrived in Korea on Sunday, with the government hoping the mass shipment can relieve the market that has been hit hard by a recent bird flu outbreak. The Agriculture Ministry says the imported eggs will be sold at around half the price of locally sourced eggs, which have been soaring in price due to a supply shortage. The ministry also said an additional shipment of 650,000 eggs from Thailand was set to arrive in the port of Incheon on Monday. The authorities are hoping to distribute the imported eggs to local markets by the end of this month at the latest. Now, summer is the season of outdoor escapes, with walking, jogging, and cycling being some of the most popular activities. Recently, many Koreans have been eager to try out something new, like indoor rock climbing or a game of mini football, with many of these activities often taking place in the evening hours. Our Lee Ji-won has more.
With more hours of daylight, summer is a time for activity even in the evening. Teams of futsal players are enjoying their evening exercise at a field in Bucheon City, just west of Seoul. They're ordinary office workers who meet once every 2 weeks to work out while enjoying the night's cool breeze.
We exercise at this time because we have to come after work, but also because the temperature is much more favorable, especially since it's summer now.
The time is getting late, but the players aren't tired yet.
We really enjoy this time and try to make the most of it to get rid of the stress from our jobs. Grabbing drinks after our workout is also fun.
But they aren't the only ones enjoying an evening workout. Recently, more people wanting to exercise at night are turning to these various outdoor activities for a dose of exercise and fun.
In the past, evening exercises were usually limited to just jogging or cycling, things people could do alone at their preferred time. But recently, more and more people are trying out new nighttime activities, from futsal matches to rock climbing, and more teams and facilities are popping up to accommodate them. In fact, one of Korea's popular e-commerce sites saw sales related to nighttime outdoor activities increase by around 30% compared with the same time last year. While the seasonal factors encourage people to exercise at night rather than during the day, some experts say the trend also reflects a change in people's perception of nighttime itself.
In the past, many simply used time after work to take rest and chill in the evening, because there was a lot of overtime work and also get-togethers that companies required their employees to participate in. But now, with companies trying to respect people's lives outside of work, office workers have much more time in the evening.
The expert added that the increase in single-person households also contributed to this trend.
Many young single people who live alone are also looking for new hobbies and opportunities to bond with people. And with growing demand and interest in these outdoor after-work activities, more teams and programs are being made.
But with the emergence of this new trend, many people have raised questions on whether it's good or bad for our health. Doctors say exercise can reduce stress, making exercise at night more beneficial, as this is when stress hormones are high. But they also say that there are a number of things for people to note.
An appropriate amount of exercise before going to bed helps people sleep deeper, but an excessive amount of exercise increases nervous activity and disrupts sleep or makes it difficult to fall asleep. So it's better to take a shower, stretch and massage at least 1 hour before going to bed.
To meet the high demand for these activities, local authorities are also running their own programs. Ilsan, a city to the west of Seoul, provides its residents with various nighttime programs, from Zumba dance to aerobics. This class, organized by the National Health Insurance Service, holds daily dance and stretching sessions and is gaining much popularity.
It's really refreshing to work out at night. I think it's a better workout than simply walking around the park. I really like it. I wish we had these programs throughout the year. We don't have them in the winter.
With the government support and people's active participation, this trend could lead to a healthier lifestyle for Korea's citizens. Lee Ji-won, Business Daily.
And that wraps it up for today. Thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with more at the same time, same place for your Business Daily. Until then, goodbye.